Welcome to In Her Voice, a podcast created for women who listen to and live by their deepest wisdom, their inner voice. This was made for you, the woman who feels pulled to more, to lead, to create, to dream, and to be a world changer. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am an inner voice coach. Join me here each week as we explore what it means to reach for your inspired potential, all while honoring your worthiness each and every day. Well, hey there. This is Kelly. I'm so glad that you're here today. I'm so glad that you hit play and you invited me into your space to share your time with me. I can never tell you enough how much that means to me. And I hope that you feel my gratitude coming to you right now. I have a really wonderful episode, a wonderful interview for you today with Natha Campanella. She is an astrologer, and we're talking all about using astrology as a personal development tool. I think we think of it as sort of like this really woo-woo, kind of like telling you what's going to be happening in your future. And she has a much different take on it. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to you. So even if you're sort of on the fence about if you believe in it or whatever, I really encourage you to stick with this and learn something new, a new way that you can use astrology. And I am a personal development junkie. I love reading books. I love practicing. I love making habits that encourage me to develop personally, emotionally, spiritually. And so when she reached out to me and sort of like floated this idea of using it as a tool for personal development, I was like, you know what? We can always use something else in our toolkit. So let me tell you really quick all about Natha. Natha Campanella is a professional astrologer, teacher, podcaster, and mama of 2 teenagers. Using her ability to translate the personal experience of her clients into astrological terms and her sharp intuitive skills, she's adept at giving practical and useful guidance. She also teaches people how to use astrology as a transformational toolkit for emotional wellness. I really think that you're going to love this interview. So let's get right to my conversation with Natha Campanella. Well, Natha Campanella, welcome to In Her Voice. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Oh, I've been really excited about this for a few days now, so I'm glad it's finally showed up.
Yeah. And we're digging into the juicy topic of using astrology as a personal development tool, which I think when people think of astrology, they don't necessarily think of it like that. So I think it's going to be a super fun convo. And I thought maybe a good place to start would just be like you sharing quickly with us how you first got into astrology, because I think we all, we've all read the forecast, like everyone knows their sign, but I think what we're talking about today is a much deeper understanding of how it can help you. So how did you get into it?
Yeah, I mean, we all have read our horoscopes in the paper back in the days when there was paper, and now it's online. So it's definitely deeper than that, for sure. The kind that I practice and the kind that I originally discovered. I discovered astrology really when I was going through a divorce, and I was having coffee with a girlfriend, and she mentioned that she had been to an astrologer, and I thought, well, hey, I'm looking for answers. Like I don't really know what that means, but I'm down to try that. So I went, and oh my God, my mind was just blown, because this woman, who actually later became a mentor to me and a teacher, I felt like she had the book of my life and my life purpose and my path. And she was just reading it to me. And it was so validating. I was going through a divorce, so I felt really, I felt like I had screwed everything up, and that everything was my fault, and I was a failure, and all of these things that we can go through when we have something in our life that didn't work out the way that we expected. And she, in this really objective, validating way sort of described to me the deeper parts of what was happening. And that was a real turning point for me, because it was like I didn't have that much self-awareness about really past what the cultural expectations were and, what I thought marriage was supposed to look like. But she really opened it up for me. And then I was instantly interested and did a lot of self-study. I was always asking people for their charts, let me tell you what I know. But still not quite really grasping it, because it's such a big map. That's one of the things right. It's frustrating for people. It's like you try to go online and read about yourself, but there are only, when you're reading descriptions astrologically, they're very one-dimensional, versus when you have somebody there that's translating it for you, you can really, really kind of go into like the juice, the meat of it, and make it very personal. And, going through my life, living my life, I decided to get certified as a life coach. And then a few years after that, I happened to get an email from an astrologer that I had followed for many years, asking for apprenticeships, wanting an apprentice. And so I applied and got in. And we spent 2 years really doing an intensive apprenticeship. And now it's like I get to be that person for other people, where I get to kind of open up their book and explain to them and just give them objective, validating guidance about what is here and what was historically happening and some of the potentials for the future. So I really consider it to be such a gift that I stumbled upon it and am now able to help other people with it.
Mm-hmm. And, though I find in my life anyway, oftentimes that's how things happen. We stumble upon our zone of genius. It's not always super obvious, I think, at the beginning. So I just love stories like that. So one thing I'm super interested in, particularly, and you said that you can look at things in a historical way. And I find that to be very interesting, because I think the common perception of astrology is that it's a tool for us to sort of say, like, this is what you can expect might happen to you in the next month or the next year. Like, I feel like most people think of it as a forward-looking tool. But what I really hear you saying is that you can also look backwards with that and help you to really understand yourself more. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm pretty clear about this when I work with people, is that I am not big into predictive astrology, because there are too many future potentials. We can talk about some of the energetic feeling of what might be coming down the road for you, but in my opinion, the really valuable stuff comes oftentimes from looking back into the past, and astrology is a great tool for that. We can track back to some of the things that might have been happening for you in utero even, and then through childhood. And I find that when we lay that groundwork, that it often will open up these doors for people to see their experiences and their reactivity, even the voice of their inner critic, through the lens of what was the conditioning, what was happening back then that sort of crystallized these things into our system that we're now operating with. Because as we identify what those crystallizations are, right? Like, what is it that makes me always react in this way? That's when we can really have some freedom of movement to kind of shift what's there and ultimately like our lives a little better, have a more ease in the experience.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe this is too much into the nitty gritty. And if it is, I just want you to be honest with me and tell me. But I feel like I like this idea of like looking back historically, understanding what are the events and the circumstances that created the conditioning that we carry with us, often, most likely subconsciously, right? Mm-hmm. How does astrology play into that? I mean, I know, like, I can look back in my life and I can say, well, my parents got divorced when I was 2, and then this happened when I was 5, and, but how does astrology sort of mix into the circumstances, if you will?
Yeah, so we could, I mean, if we wanted to really drill down, we could actually look at specific time periods in a life and say, let's see what was happening astrologically for you when you were 2. But usually in a reading, we're not, I'm not taking the time to do that. But what I am doing is I'm interpreting every planet in the sky comes with a human archetype assigned to it. So, for example, the moon. The moon is one of our most personal planets. It is about the way that we relate to the world emotionally, what we need in order to feel emotionally secure, and just the quality of our emotions, whether we get really weepy and hurt feelings, or whether we're very stoic, or maybe we're very mental about our emotions. And it sort of depends based on your moon sign. But one of the things that we can do, for example, is the moon is also related to our mother. So we can go back, or I can go back into your chart and look at the connections that your moon is making, look at where it is, and sort of intuit, whether the relationship with your mom was a tricky one. Maybe it was a very supportive one. Maybe there were some ways that you really learned that you had to please her or take care of her, or somehow show up as a specific version of yourself in order to keep her stable. All of these things we can see in a chart, and the same is true for the father. And so a lot of times I just start right there. If somebody is coming to me and saying, I have this issue that I'm dealing with and I'm having a hard time understanding it. So we can go and just kind of start with the childhood right there. Mm-hmm. Not everybody wants to do that in a reading. Some people are more like, I want to know why I always feel like I have to be such a high achiever. Why am I always a perfectionist? Why do I feel like I can never live up to my own standards? And in that case, we can look in different parts of the chart. But I also find that a lot of it really does typically go back to mom and dad.
Mm-hmm. I feel like you kind of just did like a little mini reading on me, because all of those things that you said are true. I just only kind of. But no, this is so fascinating to me. And, I think too, I also agree with you that, like, understanding where we decided that we were going to believe certain things, like that conditioning piece, is so valuable, because that gives us the power to choose if we want to retain those beliefs. And I think that is sort of like the second step. So the first step is like the understanding, and you can do that with someone like yourself, or you can do that through journaling. You can do that with an inner voice coach like me. Like, there's lots of different ways to do that. But I think that let's talk about the second step, right? So once we find out, oh, this was my conditioning, this is what was happening astrologically, this was my relationship with my mother and my father, what is the next step?
So, a lot of the next step does involve, at least in the kind of work that I'm doing with people, looking at the current astrology. So looking at what is happening right now in your life that is going to be supportive of making these changes, or what's happening that's kind of triggering your desire to look deeper. And we have, probably most people have heard of Mercury retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
We have the
fear.
planet...
Most people fear it.
Right. And I think that's one of my issues with pop astrology, is that there is this sense that astrology happens to us. We have no control over it. It's these planetary things come down, and then we're all just, we have this several week or several month period of suffering, and it's not like that at all. We have so much free will, and it depends on what we do with it. So, what I'm talking about now is, let's say that you're having a transit, and a transit is just simply when there's a planet in the sky that is making a connection to a planet in your chart. So let's say it's your moon. And let's say that Saturn is transiting your moon. So here's what that means. you've come to me, you've said, I'm just trying to understand something that's happening to me emotionally right now in my life. And, maybe it's about my mom, and we kind of come to some conclusions about that. Then we look at what Saturn's doing. And Saturn is a planet of structure. It's a planet of boundaries. It is also a planet of the inner critic. So a lot of times when that happens, we say, oh, okay, so you're working with some big inner critic activity right now. And this is a time when it is very appropriate to maybe have better boundaries with your mom, maybe to even create some structure with your own emotions. Maybe, like you said, journaling. Maybe you want to journal every single morning when you wake up. It kind of gives us the guidance to know here are some really important steps that you can take right now to support yourself, because everything is always unfolding. Mm-hmm. And we always have these opportunities of like, okay, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to make the best of this? Or, maybe I'm not going to make the best of this. Maybe I'm going to continue to just sort of suffer. And that is our choice.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'm going to play devil's advocate. What would you say to people who say, well, I just don't want to know? I think it's better to just not know. I'm just going to let things happen the way they happen. What would you say to someone like that?
It's like, I'm kind of like that myself. I do not want to know if bad things are going to happen. And I get really frustrated with astrologers who tell people that, this is going to be really hard. You're screwed, because mm-hmm. It's not really like that. It's like, even if you don't know what's happening, that's fine. You're still going to be living your life. You're probably going to be getting a lot of these clues and insights on your own. But there's also something really valuable about knowing, so that when you are bumping up against something, you've just gotten off the phone with your mom and she has really triggered you and you don't know what you're going to do with it, you can think, interesting, I'm in that Saturn transit. Okay, so remembering back to the boundaries thing and remembering back to really trying to be more structured in the way that I understand myself. Like, how can I support myself? And it's just a little easier,
yeah.
right?
Well, it becomes a tool for awareness. And, it's almost like once you are aware that that's happening, you also can become more aware of how you can use that information, like you say, to support yourself. And I think that awareness, that's not a new word for people that are listening to this podcast anyway. I think it's something we all strive for. Like, we want to have an awareness of like where we are emotionally, where we are spiritually, where we are physically, all of these things. And so this is just another tool to provide a different perspective of awareness, right?
Exactly. And I think that, a lot of times we can get similar awarenesses, right? If we have a conversation with our girlfriend or with our partner or whatever, they can reflect back to us what they see, but it can feel a little bit like, I don't want to hear this from you. Like mm-hmm. It's layered with some other stuff that shows up in the relationship, some other baggage. But when you're working like with you as a coach or with me as an astrologer, there's something very just objective about hearing it. It's like we can hear it a little bit better when it's coming from, in the case of astrology, it's coming from this like,
set thing almost.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me to think too, like, I know for me personally, I've had an astrology reading. I never knew there was anything beyond like your sun sign until I had a reading. And then I was like, oh, well, like my sun sign is Gemini, but my moon is in Cancer. And this is how those interact together. And it sort of helped me understand myself, and not just understand, but like accept myself, as opposed to like being judgy of the things that I feel like used to be wrong with me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because we're with ourselves 24/7. And so it's almost like we're standing in the middle of the room. So we can turn around and we can see what's in the room, but sometimes it takes like zooming out to really see the entire picture. And that's what astrology can do. So it can explain to you, here are the potentials of what can happen for you with a Gemini sun. And here's what can also come in and be layered in with a Cancer moon. Now, there's a lot of differences between those signs. And so we might, as most of us do, we get really frustrated with certain aspects of ourselves. And we think, God, I wish this could be different. Like, why do I always do this? And when you know your astrology a little bit more, it's like you have the reason for why it's happening. And then you know what you're working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so let's go back to talking about the inner critic, because I am a recovering perfectionist. My inner critic is so strong. And I have learned how to discern the difference between my inner critic, or what I call my inner mean voice, and my inner voice, that voice of wisdom that I know that I can trust, that will always lead me the right way. I can hear the difference. But I think that a lot of women struggle with that inner critic. And I'm curious to know how we can apply what we learn about ourselves through astrology to, shall we say, taming that inner critic, or at least starting to understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, when I'm reading a chart for somebody, I'm always looking at Saturn, because Saturn, in the way that I see it, is the inner critic. Saturn does a few different things in our chart. It does talk about what our highest path of potential is, so our life's great work. But before we can get there, we really have to stumble through quite a bit of fear and trying to do it right, and really, internalizing everything that we have been told from authority figures about what a good person is like. And that is Saturn. So we can look at the Saturn in your chart and say, all right, so here is sort of the quality of your Saturn. Here are some of the things that it might really bug you about, right? It might really give you a hard time about. And here are some ways that you can really support yourself in being self-aware enough to know when you're under attack, right? And I think that's part of the work that you do, is helping clients to identify how pervasive these inner voices can be, and how to really, take focus off of that inner mean voice and put more focus onto that higher self, that inner sort of witness guidance. And that is not intuitive to us, because most of us are raised by parents, and certainly in a society where you follow the rules. You do what's expected of you. You're a good citizen if you're following the laws. And so that becomes that inner critic, is I have to do good. I have to be right. I have to be perfect. And it's so pervasive, and none of us even really get it until we start looking at, like, wow, this thing is big.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know for me, I've bumped up against so many things where when I really start to sit with it deep inside of me, I'm like, do I even believe that? And it's shocking, and it takes a certain amount of bravery and courage to be willing, even to be willing to question those things that you've always thought were just part of what you believed, when really they were given to you. Or maybe a more apt description would be you've been burdened with them. And so how do you encourage people to find that courage?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, I think that if you're coming to me as an astrologer, or you as a coach, that there is something inside of you that's saying, I need help with this. I'm tired of sort of being under the thumb of this thing. And I think a lot of it just comes down to giving people the tools to notice when it's happening. Unfortunately, that inner critic, when it comes in, we usually dump a lot of chemicals, those chemical dumps that we get around, oh, I've just messed this up, or like, oh my God, this isn't perfect. And we can get a little hooked into those chemicals. But the more that we are aware, the more that we can, it really is a sort of courageous, it's very courageous to be able to turn that voice on its head, because if we look at that voice like it's sort of an internalized parent, right? And that's what I find is it's usually very similar to the most demanding of our parents. There is a sense of like, I'm not relating anymore to this like I'm 5 or 10 or whatever. I'm relating to this like I'm the adult that I am. I'm the mother, I'm the partner, I'm the person, I'm in this big adult body. And that in itself is very courageous. It's like you're allowing that inner child to sort of stand up and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it is a process, right? This is not an overnight thing, but like you said, you have done a lot of work, a significant amount, and here you are, like you're, for the most part, free of those constant attacks. I'm sure they still pop in every once in a while.
They're still there. They're still there. But I think that the difference is when they come, I can move out of that place faster.
Yes.
Like I have the tools, I have the understanding, and I have the awareness to be able to like get out of it faster. And that's what I want for everyone. Like that is my goal with this podcast, with the work I do. I want to empower women to take whatever tool they need to help themselves to be able to move through like those gross feelings that we all experience. And what comes up for me is I know, and I used to be this person, right? The person who says, well, I'm smart, I can figure this out on my own, I don't need any help. And maybe even as I say this, someone's listening and they're like, yep, that's me. I don't need that. I don't need astrology. I don't need this tool. I don't need that tool. I know what I would say to them, but I'm curious to know what you would say to them.
I sort of take this look at astrology. There are some people that will say, oh, that's just bogus. That doesn't work. And I say it is only as valuable as what it teaches you about yourself.
Yes.
So it's not for everybody. But if you find yourself really in a place where you're saying, I know everything, I'm smart enough, I can figure this out, and you're still bumping up against the same wall over and over, or you're still feeling that sense of lack, or you're like that higher self-guidance of like, something has to change here, something has to change, give it a try, because very likely it will help you to make some connections and really shed some light on some of those corners of your mind that, you just don't have access to. We can be really smart, but we can't always get into our subconscious or our unconscious, because that stuff is back behind a locked door sometimes.
Yeah.
And working with coaches, getting astrology readings, it can very often be that key. Somebody else has the key that can unlock the door. You don't necessarily have the key.
I love that you said that. And I just want to say to everybody too, there's no shame in not being able to do it by yourself. I mean, I think of every woman that I have interviewed on this podcast, and let's see, I think when on the date that we're recording this, I just released number 227. That's a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of women, and I don't know a single one of them who has not had help. And so there is no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in using the tools available to you. I mean, I just think of like this, like if I were going to build a house and I had never built a house before, well, I would need some instructions. I would need a hammer and some nails. Like there are things that you need in order to be able to do the things that we do. And there's no shame in that at all.
Yes. And, just to give you a personal example of this Saturn concept, my Saturn in my natal chart is in the sign of Cancer. And Cancer, as you know, is very much about like our deep emotional landscape. And so one of the ways for me of managing my inner critic is to talk about my emotions and my feelings. And I have done some of my best processing with therapists, right? I mean, when I was 18 years old, I graduated from high school, I moved to Atlanta, and within 3 months, I was like, I need a therapist, because I just knew on some level that I was internalizing all of my angst and all of my anger and really turning it on myself, and that was not going to be sustainable. So for me, reaching out to other people has 100% been one of the most supportive tools for me in managing that inner critic voice, is having somebody to really reality check with me, get it all off my chest, and then reality check and say, all right, so is this really true?
Yeah. And sometimes that's all you need is that reflection back to you. Sometimes all you need is someone to say back to you the exact same thing that you just said. But when you hear it out of someone else's mouth, you say, well, that's ridiculous. I love what you said about parenting. I don't remember who it was that said this to me, but I was going through a really challenging time, and my inner critic was loud, loud, loud. And she said to me, Kelly, you're a mom. You're a great mom. When will you stop parenting yourself like your mom parented you and parent yourself like you parent your child? And I just was floored because I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. And we do parent ourselves. We do guide ourselves in that way. And, we can choose what that looks like and what that feels like and what that sounds like. And that was just a huge moment for me of like, I was doing all this work to make sure that I was parenting my kid in a loving, non-shaming way. And I wasn't doing that for myself. And that was a huge turning point for me in my own process, I would say. So I just love that. Okay. So let's talk about intuition, because we've talked about free will, right? Like we can sit down and we can look at the charts and we can see where the things are, but we still get to choose how we react. We still get to choose how we behave. Where does intuition fit inside of this?
Yeah, the intuition is such a big piece of any chart, and we find it actually in several places, mostly with the water signs and the water planets, because the water is so much about our emotional connection, not even to ourselves, well, of course to ourselves, but also to the world around us and to the people around us. Something that comes up with a lot of my clients, because a lot of people that, want to do an astrology reading also are typically very sensitive. They are feeling the things happening around them. They're getting very caught up in some of the just, the external fears and the angst and the outrages of being a human, and they don't know what to do with it. And we as children are very rarely taught to tune into our instincts. It is back to that sort of Saturn parenting. It is like or at least I think there are a lot of newer parents that don't do this, but certainly some of us with baby boomer parents, like myself, this sense that like, I'm the parent, you do what I say, even if what I say totally doesn't jive with what you want.
Or with what you feel is right.
Or with what you feel is right. You're doing it anyway. So we learn to turn that intuition off. We learn to bury it. And then as we get older, we are so sensitive and we don't understand it. And it really is, it causes us problems, because what I see we do with sensitivity that we don't understand and we're not able to use is that we either dissociate and we numb, right, the sensitivity, or we repress and then get sort of bitter and resentful. That happens a lot. But I'm always encouraging, I'm always saying, here is where the sensitivity lies. Here is what you will feel. You will feel with a Scorpio and Pluto, for example, what you're usually feeling is the repressed emotions of people, the things that people don't want to feel. With Pisces and Neptune, you're feeling the collective. You're feeling just some of the random stuff that is floating around. With Cancer, you're just feeling like the deep needs of others. And all three of those can be really uncomfortable things to feel into if you don't know what you're working with. If you do know, then you're like, oh, not only can you trust your own intuition, but you know what to do with other people's stuff, and you can have better boundaries.
Mm-hmm. And that's huge, especially these days. My gosh. Yes. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of feelings floating around. And to be able to discern what's your own stuff and what's other people's stuff is really, really powerful. Okay, I feel like we could go on for hours. This is so fascinating to me. But I just really want to encourage everyone that's listening. And I think this is the beautiful thing about any tool. If it resonates with you, go towards it. If it doesn't, that's okay. Like, that's not the tool for you. Like, it's not a end all be all for everyone. And so if those of you who are listening, you think, I want to know this, like, I want to know where whose emotions I'm feeling. I would like to know how my inner critic gets triggered and how that pops up. Then I definitely encourage you to connect with Natha. And why don't you tell us how people can learn more about you, how they could sign up for a reading if that's something that they're interested in?
Yeah. So I actually have on the front page of my website, and my website is nathacampanella.com, but I have a few free offerings. I have an ebook called Astrology is a Superpower. And if you download that, it has instructions for how to get your hands on your own natal chart. And then it gives some brief descriptions of, here's how to find your Saturn, for example, and here's what that might mean. So check that out. It's a really easy way to kind of dip your toe into a little bit of self-discovery. There's also a sun sign guide where you can learn what the sign of the sun of the month really means and how to make the most of it. So there's some cool stuff. You can also book a private reading at nathacampanella.com. And I'm on Instagram a lot. You can find me there. But yeah, I would love to work with any of you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I kind of said this before, but I know for me, when I first had my reading, I felt so seen and validated. Like, oh, that's just who I am. And that's okay. And it opened up a lot of space for me to like love myself and accept myself for who I am. And that's an ongoing process. That's not a one and done. That's an ongoing process. And so I am really excited for people to connect with you. And I'm going to go download your little guide. Yeah. I have my chart already, but like I'm, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. So I think that will be really interesting. And we'll put links to all of those things in the show notes. And whatever podcast app you're listening to, you should be able to have a live link there. But if it's not for some reason, just head on over to kellycover.com and you can find all of the things there. So Natha, I am curious to know what your inner voice, not your inner critic, but your inner voice, your deep voice of wisdom is saying to you these days.
Oh, it's so funny because you almost like articulated it for me a few minutes ago. My inner guidance is really quite clear about staying off of news and being really, really curating what I'm allowing into my field. Even in terms of social media, I've gotten really good at using that mute button because I can tell the shift in my energy when I turn on like the news. It feels heavy, it feels sticky, it feels icky, and that is my cue that I don't want to be plugged into that. And I think that for all of us right now, especially the sensitive among us, there's so much in the field, and it's not valuable for us to be plugging our sort of life source energy into that, because the really important thing is that we are in this time period where if we want to be of the most service to ourselves and our families and the world, it is about getting more internal and really checking in with what is real and what is true and what makes us feel grounded and present instead of what zaps us out into fear and outrage. That's my strong messaging right now for myself.
I am so with you on that. In fact, I was working, I do what I create my kinder habits for the month, and they're based in how I want to feel. And one of the things that very strongly came through for me is no social media at all before 9 a.m. And, people listening may be like, well, why 9 a.m.? Well, because those first few hours of my day set me up for the rest of the day. And I have to be honest, I'm not perfect at it. Like, there are days I pick up my phone and I'm on Instagram before I even think about it. So I'm still working on the practice of it. But I know on the days where I don't plug in before 9, and what I'm doing instead is plugging into my own inner voice, plugging into myself, creating things for myself. And man, what a difference that makes for me. I am so with you on that.
Yes, I love it. Every single one of us that is on that train, I just feel like it's the more the better, right? It's like if we're going to create a ripple effect that is valuable, that's the kind of thing that we're going to really have to work on for ourselves. And it is a work in progress. I'm not perfect at it either, but I really am starting to notice the quality of the activation that happens when I'm scrolling through Instagram and I read a post that it sort of needles me, and it's like, okay, I didn't need that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. Well, I hope that this encourages everyone to not only think about using astrology as a personal development tool, but also thinking about what you're allowing in. This was just a tiny bit of this conversation, but I think it's so important. So important. Natha, thank you for your wisdom and your time, and for your beautiful voice that you're sharing here with us today. I so appreciate you.
I feel like I could talk to you forever, Kelly. So thank you so much. What a great way for me to start my day.
I want to tell you that after my conversation with Natha, which was a couple of months ago, I did have a reading with her, and it was so wonderful. I felt so held by her. It was so loving. And, it really helped me realize that anything that we have that helps us understand ourselves and love ourselves more is a powerful tool. And I really see this as something that can help you just have a lot of compassion for yourself and for where you are, and help you understand sort of the different parts of your life that you've gone through and the parts that you have to look forward to. It was really powerful. So I encourage you, if you're interested in that, to definitely reach out and head on over to Natha's website and check out her offerings, because I highly, highly recommend. And another personal development tool that I would love to share with you today, and you've heard me talk about it before, is the Enoughness Planner. I feel powerfully and passionately about helping women feel good enough, because really, truly, when you feel good enough, that is when you are able to step into your true and boldest power. That is when you are able to start taking action on the desires that have been planted inside of you for so long. Whatever they might look like, whether that's a business, whether that's starting a new hobby, whether that's taking on a new challenge, whatever that is, you are more than capable and more than powerful of doing that when you believe that you are enough. And so the Enoughness Planner is a very simple tool to help you cultivate kinder habits that are rooted in your desires, so you can feel good enough every single day. Every single day. And it works. It works. I've been getting emails and messages from people who have been using the planner for the past 3 or 4 months. It came out in December. And every time I open one up, I just get chills. Not because it's something that I made, but because when you apply your efforts and your time and your energy to yourself, that's when transformation happens. This is just a tool. The Enoughness Planner is just a tool, just like having an astrology reading with Natha is a tool. It's up to you to use that tool. So if you're really ready to step into your own enoughness and claim that power that's inside of you, you can check out the Enoughness Planner at kellycovert.com/enoughness. It's available for order on Amazon, so you can get it to yourself in 2 to 3 days if you have Prime. I want you to know this. I believe from the depths of my soul that you are powerful, that you are purposeful, that you are here to live a life that is fulfilling and magical and your very own. Remember this, you are worthy.